to my wheel head is I'll clean it. Just kind of give it a little sponge down. And let the wheel do the work for you. So get it spinning and then you can just move the sponge like this. Just to get anything off the sponge. I'll toss my towel on it real quick. I want it damp, but not wet. Okay, the dampness will help the clay stick, but if there's too much water, it'll fly right off. If it's bone dry, it won't stick very well either. So we want to round the bottom. Also dry your hands before you handle the clay. We're going to do this with dry hands to start with. So we want the clay rounded, so when we throw this down the center, as this compresses down, air will fly out from under it and won't trap any air. If you have a divot in here, it'll trap air and the piece will come off the wheel head. It'll cause a lot of issues. All right, so get that nice and rounded. Try to aim as close to center as you can and smack it down nice and hard. You can see I left an imprint with my hand. Now I will also hit it a couple times and then kind of with my pinkies, I'll karate chop the bottom of this and then I'll smear my finger along to try and seal this to the wheel head. At that point, this isn't coming off, not easily. Okay, so we're good on the wheel head. Okay, so if you see, when we're going full speed, this thing's wobbling all back and forth. We want this to be perfectly in the center of the wheel head. So the end result is this shouldn't be, you shouldn't see that it's moving back and forth. So to do that, we're going to get our hands wet. We're going to get the clay a little bit wet. The water is your lubricant. But if you use too much water, then it's going to saturate the clay and it won't hold up anymore. So there's a balance. It'll take time. You guys will learn your balance. I'll help you with that. I tend to throw with a little bit more water than you probably should, but I throw quickly. So if you want to use a lot of water, you have to throw quick. If you want to use less water, you throw slower. So first thing we're going to do with your left hand, the palm or the heel of your left hand, you're going to use that and you're going to push into the clay. Your elbow, you want either into your hip. You don't want it way out like this. You want it closer to your body. My arm is always like up against my rib cage, and my elbow is in my hip. And actually, raise my seat up just a little bit. There we go. Okay. And you can see that it moves my hand and bounces my hand around. My other hand, I call this a karate chop center. That's not really the proper word for it, but my right hand is just kind of on the top center. Okay. And I'm going to push down with my right hand while I'm pushing toward the center with my left. Okay? So what I'm trying to do is force the clay into a space.
But you're teaching to right-handed right now.
This is the right-handed way to do it, right? So my wheel is turning counterclockwise. You're going to use your left hand and the heel of your left hand, have your hand on the wheel head, and you're going to push forward, but I lean my whole body in. So I'm not using my arm, I'm using my body, and I'm leaning my body in. And I have my arm pressed into my hip and my arm, so it's trapping. If I'm out here like this, the clay is going to bounce my arm around and it's going to move me around like crazy, right? So some of you guys, you'll end up like, the clay will bouncing you around like this. And if I see you doing that, I'm going to remind you to get your elbow in and anchor it down, okay? So I'm going to push forward, leaning forward, and I'm going to push down. And what that's doing is it's going to force the clay into this space, okay? Now you remember I told you that the pedal holds the speed, right? So if I need to, I'll take my foot off the pedal so I can get a little different leverage on it or whatever.
And this is at top speed. Right?
This is at top speed. These first few things we're going to do are at full speed, okay? So you can see it's pretty well centered now. I can test that by just sort of running my finger down the side and just feeling if it's bumping, or you can see if the finger is moving, like it's a little bit off center, you can see your finger bouncing, right? So you want it in the center. So all we're doing is just pushing forward with our left, down with our right. We're trapping the clay. This is a great centering method for about 3 pounds of clay and less. When you guys start using more clay, I'll show you coning, which I think Lori teaches coning. Coning is where you'll actually kind of bring the clay up and then push it down and bring it up, push it down. And that's a good way to center large amounts of clay, but it's also, I found it takes longer to kind of get the hang of coning. So I just kind of like to teach this because you're just pushing forward and pushing down. So if you push forward, the clay has to go somewhere, so it's going to come up. If you push down, the clay has to go somewhere and it goes out. So we push like that, it's centered. And again, you can test it, just run your finger along it. The very, very bottom, I don't worry about. If that's not perfectly centered, if it bounces a little bit, don't worry about that because we'll trim it off when we're done, or we'll trim it off when we're actually cleaning up the piece to trim next week. So I don't worry about the very bottom. So you want to make sure it's level and centered at the top. And it should kind of look like it's not really moving when it's spinning. Okay, centering is going to be your biggest challenge at first. Now once it's centered, we're going to make an opening because it's pot, so it has to have an opening. Whatever fingers you want to use, it doesn't really matter. I usually just start with my thumb, get it right over the center, and I just push down nice and slow. You want your movements to be slower than the wheel is spinning. If you move too fast, that's when things get out of center. Okay, so I'm just going to push my thumb down. The hand on the side here is just resting on the side. My arms are planted into my leg to keep them from moving. If the clay dries a little bit, I'll just dip my fingers into the water, take a few drips, and add water. And you can see the clay is kind of drying right here. It's not really shiny anymore. It'll start to catch. If it starts to catch on you, then it's getting too dry. Just add a couple drops of water. And you should be good. Like I said, right-handed I'm not very good, so this will look pretty realistic for you guys. Okay, so you've made your opening. Now we're going to widen the opening. Now how wide you make it depends on what you're trying to make. If you want to make a narrow, skinny tall piece, then you don't widen very much and you make it tall. If you want to make kind of a lower flat piece, then you open it up wider. I haven't planned on what I'm going to make, so we'll just open this up. What I like to do is I'll put my thumbs together to start off with, and then I just move my thumbs apart like this to kind of widen the opening. And that's fairly consistent. Once my thumbs, they're only going to make an opening this wide. So once my thumbs get to that point, I'll start moving backward. Okay, so move my thumbs apart, add a little water if I need. Okay, now that's about as wide as I can make the opening with my thumbs, like that. So now I'm going to just start moving towards myself. So again, my arms are pressed at my sides, and I'm just going to slowly move backwards. See this black that's showing up down here? Don't worry about that. That's just like oils in my skin reacting with the stainless steel wheel head. It's nothing that's going to kill you. If you get this off center a little bit, like I am now, don't fret too much. We'll center it back up in a second. So once you've opened, next thing you need to do is compress the floor. So you want to kind of flatten the floor of your piece. Part of what compressing does is it makes the floor a little bit more sturdy. It'll help to minimize any cracking that you might get on the bottom. Clay particles are kind of I think oval shaped and sort of flat, right? So when you make your opening, they're sort of hanging out a little bit in all directions, and you compress it, and it flattens them out some and gets them to lay over each other. When when clay goes through the drying and bisque and glaze process, it shrinks. This shrinks up to 15%, like 12 to 14%, but I round up to 15. So it's going to shrink quite a bit. So when it shrinks, those particles are going to shrink. So they'll move away from each other. If they're angled like this and they move away, you have a crack. If they're laying on top of each other and they shrink away, they're still on top of each other. So compressing your floor, you can just run your thumb along the bottom. Not a lot of pressure, just pushing down a little bit. You can see I'm a little bit off center because I'm not very good right-handed. So I'm just going to try and center this up a little bit. Kind of like I did at the beginning. I'm going to use the heel of my hand, my left hand. I'm going to push forward just a little bit and try and bring that back into center. Not going to worry about it too much. At this point, I've centered, made my opening, and I've widened my opening. I'm now going to slow down the wheel head. Not this much. Actually, maybe that's good. Because now we're going to bring up height. So we're going to pull some walls. And when you bring up the height, when the wheel is spinning faster, your clay is going to want to fling outward. So that's why you slow down. But when you slowed your wheel down, you need to move slower. Okay? So as I bring this up, I'm going to move up a little bit and feel the wheel spin a couple of rotations before I move up again. I like to, so you're going to have your left hand on the inside, and you're working around 430. If I can reach my left thumb outside, I will do that. And I use that to pull the wall. Because what you're going to do is squeeze in like this and hold that distance and bring the clay up. So you have wider clay above it, and you're going to bring that clay up. Okay? So you want to squeeze in and then just bring that straight up. So I'm going to lean over a little bit here. This hand is just kind of for moral support right now.
The right hand is.
The right hand is just helping a little bit. I'm bringing this up, and I'm going to release pressure a little bit towards the top of these fingers. Just going to let go kind of slowly. So I didn't bring very much up, but I brought it up and I kind of got a little bit level. I'm going to compress and recenter my rim. So with my left hand, I'm just going to have these two fingers sliding along, and my index finger, I'm going to push down a little bit and compress my rim, and that keeps your rim nice and thick. And if your center is a little bit wiggly or whatever, when you do this, that brings it back into center. Okay. If you notice, my arms are always resting on my legs or up against my sides. Because if you have everything together, then the clay will move as you want it to. If your arms are way out here and up like this, then the clay will move your arms around. But if it's on your legs, up against your side, the clay will do more of what you want it to do. All right, so now we'll do another pull. If I can still reach my thumb outside, I will do that. And I'll push in with my thumb to get a little ledge there. Didn't really take any clay off, just a little bit of slip on the outside. We're going to do the same thing. Now, when I pull up, I'm also going to pull up and a little bit towards the middle. So I want to keep the top narrow. Okay? So I'm going to slowly move up. And towards the middle. Release a little bit towards the top. So I have my fingers about this far apart the whole way up. So this should be roughly that thickness. The bottom is a little bit thicker. Right. So I'll compress and recenter my rim. We'll do another pull. Oh, if you get a lot of standing water in the bottom of your pot, every once in a while just take your sponge and bring it out of there. You're going to put water back in a second, but that standing water will start to saturate and the floor will get very wet, and then you'll have more problems with S-cracks on the floor. Okay. So at this point, I kind of can't get my thumb down to the bottom. So I'm going to switch over, and I'm going to have to use my right hand and my left hand to pull the wall. So this is where it gets a little bit trickier because this hand knows how far apart these are, but these two don't really have that connection as much. So you have to really kind of focus on trying to keep that there. I always interlock my hands, trying to have everything touching everything. Okay. So let's see. Push in a little bit with my right hand. I'm going to bring that clay up. You see how slowly I'm moving up, right? If you're moving faster than this, you're wrong. You're not really ever wrong, but you'll have mixed results. How about that?
Mixed in what way?
So move up nice and slow. As you get towards the top, want to release pressure a little bit and bring your hands up through. And you can see all the weird awkward positions my fingers are in. Right? So you'll have your hands in a lot of different weird positions just to get things to work.
But how do you know if you're going too fast?
If you're going too fast, what will end up is you'll have like one side of the pot will be a little thicker than the other. Your top, the rim will start to undulate because that thicker amount of clay is going to work its way to the rim. All right, so I still have a lot of clay down here. I'm going to slow the wheel down just a little bit more. If your hand doesn't fit, like let's say this were narrower, I can't get my hand in there, just move the clay out of the way and get your hand in there and then bring it in later. Okay. So we'll do this one more time. Push in at the bottom, bring that clay up. My wheel's going a little bit fast for this. I'm going to slow down. You see this is pretty bad because I'm not right-handed. But that's all right.
No one's judging.
Yeah, don't judge. I won't judge you guys. Not until like week 5 or 6. Then the judging begins. I've got water at the bottom, so I'm going to clear out the bottom. Okay. Now, if I move this rim out like that, you can just hug it back in. Just give it a little love, and hug it back in. And now you asked what happens if you move a little bit too fast. You can see how the rim is kind of undulating up and down. That's because this side is slightly thicker than this side because I moved a little bit too quickly or I wasn't very consistent. If you're not very consistent keeping your hands, the same distance apart, if you're kind of doing like this, then the clay is going to look like that, right? Again, we're not going to worry too much about that. Right, so get this wet again. So now we have to decide what we want to do with this. I think I'll make kind of a vase so I can show you guys how to move the clay inward and outward. Okay. I might take a little bit. I have a lot of clay down here, so I'm going to take a little more clay and bring this clay up. Again, I'll do one more little movement. All right, that'll be good. And you see, I always kind of have my hands touching each other as much as possible. As much as I can have my hands touching, I want them to be working together. Because if they're not touching, then it's going to be even harder to keep them at a consistent distance. So I want them touching. All right. So I'm going to make sort of a vase. So I'm going to push out the bottom, squeeze in at the kind of the shoulder, and then bring it out a little wider at the top. So to move clay outward, my inside hand, I'll use, these two fingers seem to work the best for me. Because my hand is kind of this angle, and the flat surface, those fingers hit. Right? If your fingers are different, then use different fingers, but I tend to use the middle too. I'm going to have my inside hand lower than my outside hand, and I'm going to push. outward because I want the clay to move outward. Okay. The outside hand is just kind of supporting the wall and trying to help not push too much. Okay. So I'm going to get everything nice and lubricated. I'm going to get my hands positioned, and I'm going to push out with my inside hand. And then when I make the shoulder, move my inside hand up so it's higher than my outside hand, and I'll move that in. I should slow down some. Okay. That is an ugly vase. So I started out with my hands like this. I was pushing, and then when I got up a little ways to about here, I switched and moved my inside hand upwards, and I had my outside hand lower, and I pushed in. You can also just squeeze and choke it, make it narrower. Alright, so this isn't the finished piece. I want to move that out a little bit more. You want to make small movements. If you want a final piece, you want to make it take 2 or 3 times to bring it out. So if you try and bring it out too much at once, you can stress the clay. It can be uneven. So we're going to do this a couple of times. So I'm going to do the same thing. Push this out. Kind of switch with my inside hand upward. Bring that in. You can see how all that unevenness really shows up as I bring this up and thinner. Again, I'm not worrying about that yet. I'm going to bring this straight up though.
Should that ultimately be corrected, or?
Yeah, I'll correct this. I tolerate it as long as I can, and then I correct it. But correcting it is not going to fix it. Correcting it is just going to stop it from doing it now, and if you bring more clay up, it's going to happen again. Okay, because the unevenness is just there. You're not going to necessarily be able to fix it. Okay. So let's pretend that's a nice shape. And now we're going to correct this part of the top that's uneven. There's a couple ways you can do it. Needle tool is probably the easiest.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have a healthy respect for this guy. In the package, it probably has a little plastic sleeve over it. Take that sleeve off and throw it away. Because it's there to help you not jab yourself, but putting it back on, you'll jab yourself more trying to get that little sleeve back on. So just get rid of it. But have a healthy respect for this guy because he's sharp. So I'm going to take this unevenness off the top, and I'm going to have my left hand on the inside. I'm going to have my needle tool lined up so that it doesn't jab my finger. Okay, and I'm going to come in just under the lowest part. I'm going to come in sideways, not at a right angle. Okay, and I have my arms at my side so I can be fairly stable. I'm going to slowly move the needle tool in until it cuts that clay off, and I'll just lift it up. Okay, so we have that off. Clean them off. Now we can kind of compress and recenter our rim. Okay. And then we'll bring him back out because we want to have a little flared out top. And at this point, I'm just going to angle my hand. Okay, I'm not going to do anything other than just lay the clay over. Like that. If you have a chamois and you want to use it, now's the time. I get the chamois between my index and middle finger on my left hand. Bring that in and just let it run along the rim. And just kind of cleans up the rim a little bit. If you have clay with grog in it, and you use your sponge to try and clean off the clay, it cleans off the clay and leaves the grog. So instead of making a smooth surface, it makes a rough surface. Your fingers will leave a nice smooth surface, and the chamois will leave a smooth surface. But the clay is, or the sponge is going to soak up the clay and leave a nice rough surface. So kind of finish the rim. You don't have to do that, it's just an extra thing. I'll try to take the water out of the pot on the bottom. Not much water down there, but there was some. Now I like to use this tool for this next step. This is an optional step, but it will save you time when it comes to trimming. There's a lot of extra clay at the bottom of this pot, this skirt. I want to get rid of that clay. Don't feel like you have to do it at this step, but it's once you've kind of learned how to do it and you're well practiced at it, it will save you a ton of time later. I'll use this guy. What I'm going to do is, with the knife edge facing the pot, I'm going to poke down. You might want to come around to see this. I'm going to poke down, and you see I have my hands together and my arms at my side, and I'm going to just take that extra clay down to the wheel head.
Did you slow down the wheel for this?
I slowed down the wheel a little bit. Mostly I slowed down the wheel just because I'm done with this pot and I don't want the spinning of the wheel to misshapen it any.
Yeah.
But yeah, I slowed down the wheel for this. Now there's a couple things you can do. We'll bring a little water into that channel. So I'm going to take my sponge and just squeeze it down a little wooden piece and get that water down the channel. And I'll take my needle tool. Hi guys! Uh-oh! I'm going to take my needle tool nice and flat to the wheel head and cut it under that piece that I just took off. Then we'll make one cut this way and the whole thing just slides away nice. And then you can get rid of all this. And all this clay you don't have to trim later. And all of this clay is, none of this is waste. So at this point, everything you do can be reclaimed and reused. So we'll just drop that there. Now the piece is almost done. I'm going to use this to kind of clean up the wheel head here a little bit. Because the next thing you need to do is get this off of the wheel head. So I'm going to clean my entire wheel head. Try and get it as clean as I can. Okay. And then if I could ask you to just get a small board for me over there. Yeah, actually, nope. This is a piece of like concrete tile. Don't use these for your wear boards because this will definitely suck all the moisture out of your pot. This should not have been in that spot. So that's perfect. You want a board that's going to be bigger than your piece. If there's a hole on one side, don't use that. Get your board a little bit wet. Doesn't have to be super wet, just damp. Okay. It's best if you use fresh, clean water for this next step. It is not required. At this point, definitely turn your wheel off. So if you step on your pedal, it's not going to do anything. Find your wire. All right. We're going to squirt a bunch of water on this wheel head
Is this
behind
the
the piece.
fresh, clean water you're using?
This is fresh, clean water.
It doesn't look so fresh and clean.
No, it's fresh, clean water. It's probably just your eyes are a little hazy or something. This is fresh, clean water. So I take my wire, wrap it around my fingers. I want my thumbs to be able to push down on the wheel head, and I'm pushing outward because if there's any slack, this is going to come up and cut the bottom of your pot. So you want it nice and tight and flat. And you're going to try and get this water and draw it underneath your pot. And this may take a couple of times, or it might go in once.
There you go.
And then your wire gets stuck underneath. So at this point, the pot is kind of floating on that water. Okay, so we're floating along. There's little thumb tabs. Push down. Those are not easy to do. Have a friend help you if you need. You want to have the board level with the wheel. Take a couple of fingers upside down and slide the pot onto the wear board. Okay. If you mark up the bottom of this a little bit with your fingers, that's fine because you're going to trim it later. So that's why you kind of want your fingers nice and low. And if you only have two, you're not going to mark it up too much. And then you have your little ugly little masterpiece. And we'll stick this over on